I'm Harry. I am 27 years old, and in December of 2023, I died for 9 minutes and came back to life. I know that sounds like the start of a bad joke or a movie trailer, but it's the truth. I was just an average guy. Well, at least that's what I tried to convince myself. I worked a regular job in a tech startup, spent my weekends with friends who didn't really know me, just the version of me I showed them. You see, I wasn't always a believer in anything like this. The idea of life after death, the supernatural, or any sort of divine intervention. I used to laugh it off. I had a good life on paper. I had friends, a decent job as a software developer, and I was just living. But even as I went through the motions of my daily life, something was always missing. A deep, gnawing emptiness inside me that I couldn't quite shake. On the outside, I looked like any other guy in their late 20s navigating the daily grind. But inside, well, that's where it all started. I wasn't just struggling with the pressure of adult life. I was suffocating under a secret, a truth I had kept hidden for as long as I could remember. I was gay. I was terrified to tell anyone. My family, my friends, society, all of them expected something different from me. And even though I wanted to shout my truth from the rooftops, I felt trapped. In my mind, coming out would mean losing everything I knew. Love, acceptance, my place in the world. But here's the thing. My world was already crumbling. It was like trying to hold back a storm with my bare hands. Every relationship I forced myself into felt empty. Every social interaction felt like an act. Every night I spent alone in my apartment, I would stare at the ceiling, wondering, is this really it? In fact, I had gotten so good at pretending that I almost convinced myself I was okay. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was living a lie. Then, one night, everything changed. I was coming home after another exhausting day. Nothing out of the ordinary. Another long day of coding, emails, and meetings. Nothing in my routine screamed, life-altering event. I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted. But I couldn't sleep. I felt restless, overwhelmed by a feeling I couldn't name. A dark thought began to creep into my mind. What if I just didn't wake up tomorrow? But I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen next. What I didn't know was that this night, this moment of absolute surrender, would be the turning point of my life. I'm about to share with you something I never thought I would. A story that, to this day, I can't fully explain. A story of a light that guided me through the darkness. A presence that spoke directly to my soul, and a decision that would forever change the course of my life. It all happened so fast. One moment, I was lying in my bed, feeling like the world was slowly smothering me. The next, I was slipping away. My body gave out. My heart stopped. There was no dramatic gasp, no struggle. It was as if the world simply flicked a switch. 1 second, I was here alive, trapped in the turmoil of my own thoughts. And the next, everything went blank. I wasn't in my body anymore. I wasn't even aware of where I was, what was happening. All I knew was that I wasn't me anymore. What is it like to die? Well, for me, it wasn't a sudden plunge into darkness or some sudden shift into oblivion. It wasn't scary at all. It was more like stepping off the edge of a cliff and finding that there was no ground beneath my feet. I wasn't falling. I was just floating. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming. Maybe I was in some kind of surreal sleep. Maybe it was just another night of being overwhelmed by the pressures of life. But I could feel it, the absence of my physical body. I couldn't feel my limbs. I couldn't hear my breath. I was suspended in a space where there were no boundaries, no limits, no gravity, just nothing. Then came the silence. It wasn't just the quiet you might find at 3 a.m. when the world is asleep. It was an oppressive silence, a stillness so profound that it felt as though I could hear the echoes of my own thoughts, too faint to be real. I could feel my thoughts swirling in circles, a dull hum, but nothing else. The silence itself was thick. It was almost as if it were pressing down on me. For a long while, that was all there was. I didn't know if I had been gone for seconds or hours. Time seemed to have stopped altogether. In that silence, I began to feel something stir, a sensation that wasn't physical, but emotional, a feeling that I wasn't alone. And then, slowly, oh so slowly, a light began to form in the distance. At first, it was nothing but a flicker, just a tiny point of light, like the soft glow of a candle in the farthest corner of a room. I felt drawn to it, without understanding why. I didn't question it. There was no fear in that moment. I was simply curious, and as I moved toward it, the light grew, expanding in size, until it was so bright, so powerful, that I felt it touch my very soul. It wasn't a harsh light, like the blinding sun on a summer day. No, this light was alive. It wasn't just something I could see. It was something I could feel deep inside me, like it was reaching into every part of my being. It was warm, so warm, in fact, that I wanted to let go of everything. I wanted to just sink into it. This was no ordinary light. It didn't have an earthly source. It wasn't coming from any bulb, any fire, any star. It was pure. It wasn't like the light from a lamp or a car headlight. It was something that transcended anything I could explain. And the strange part? I wasn't scared. At that moment, I felt more at peace than I ever had in my life. It was as if the light had seen into me and accepted me. Every insecurity, every fear, every doubt about myself, they didn't matter here. There was only this warmth, this safety, this love. The feeling was overwhelming. I wanted to cry, but there were no tears. Instead, I felt a deep release, like everything I had carried for years had just been washed away. And then a voice. The voice, gentle yet unmistakable. The first time I heard it, I couldn't quite place it. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. It wasn't just the sound of words. It was a vibration that resonated with every part of me, as if the voice wasn't just speaking to my ears, but to the very core of my being. Harry, the voice said, and even hearing my name spoken in such a calm, soothing tone felt like I was being embraced by something far greater than myself. You've been running for a long time. I didn't know what to say. I didn't need to say anything. The words weren't like any conversation I'd ever had. There was no judgment, no condemnation, just understanding. An infinite compassion wrapped around every syllable. Do you know why you're here? The voice asked, and it wasn't like a question you would ask in a conversation. It was more like a deep, profound truth that was being shared with me. I tried to answer, but no words came. I didn't know what to say, but deep down I understood. I had spent my life running from the truth about myself, running from the shame I carried for being gay, running from the expectations of others. But in this place, none of that mattered. There was no fear. There was no rejection. There was only acceptance, only love. And then the voice said something that made everything in my life suddenly make sense. You are enough, Harry. You've always been enough. I wasn't prepared for that. I had spent years, decades, believing I wasn't good enough. That who I was at my core wasn't worthy of love or acceptance. I had believed the lie that I needed to fit into a box, to be what others expected of me, to hide parts of myself that I thought were broken. But here, in this place of warmth, peace, and love, I realized something. I was never broken. I had always been enough. And for the first time in my life, I believed it. The light didn't just illuminate the space around me. It illuminated me. It showed me the parts of myself I had hidden from for so long. The parts one was ashamed of, the parts one didn't think were worth loving. But here I was accepted. I was whole. And then, as if the light itself were taking form, I saw him. At first, it was just an outline, no details, just a figure surrounded by the most brilliant light. But as he stepped closer, I could see him more clearly. I didn't know how to describe him. He was everything. His presence was overwhelming, not in a terrifying way, but in the most profound sense of peace. It was Jesus. And the moment I realized that, something inside me clicked. His eyes were soft but piercing. There was a deep understanding in them. It wasn't like the portraits I had seen in church. No, this was different. His eyes seemed to see through me, into me, and in that instant, I knew he saw all the pain, all the confusion, all the things I had tried to hide from the world. And in that moment, I felt no shame, no fear, no rejection, just love, pure love. I don't think I'll ever forget the moment I stood at the threshold of two worlds. The light around me, the presence of Jesus, it all felt like the most peaceful place I could imagine. It wasn't heaven as I had always imagined it. No clouds, no golden streets, no angels with harps. But there was something undeniably sacred about this place. It felt like the very essence of peace itself. The kind of peace you only experience when all the weight you've been carrying in your lifetime is completely lifted. And as I stood there, a part of me wanted to stay forever. There was no pain here, no worries, no expectations, no pretending, just pure, unfiltered love. Every bit of me felt safe, whole, and complete, the way I had always longed to feel but had never fully known how to achieve. I had spent so many years feeling like something was wrong with me, feeling disconnected from the world. I had tried to find my place, my identity, in all the wrong ways. But here, I felt whole for the first time, like I didn't need to hide, like I could just be. But as I stood there, gazing at the serene, golden glow that stretched infinitely before me, something shifted in my heart. A soft tug, a pull. It was Jesus. His gaze never wavered. He didn't need to say a word. He was simply present. But I knew what he was asking me. Not with his voice, but with his eyes. Do you want to stay? It was the kind of question that made everything inside me freeze. I had always wanted peace. I had wanted to escape the pressure of living up to the expectations of everyone around me, to escape the self-doubt and the loneliness I had carried with me for so long. In this place, there was no more fear. There was no more shame. There was only light. But the pull in my chest grew stronger. It wasn't a pull away from this peace. It was a pull toward something else. Something I didn't fully understand yet. I looked at Jesus, searching for an answer that would make the decision easier. What I felt in that moment was something I could never have explained with words alone. It was like the universe itself was waiting for me to make a choice. And in the silence that stretched between us, I understood. The peace that I felt here was real. The love was real. But my work wasn't finished. There was something more for me to do, something that went beyond this moment. I had been given the gift of understanding, of acceptance, and now it was time to share it. But there was still a part of me that wanted to stay, to not go back to the world that had never felt like it belonged to me. To not face the pain, the doubts, and the loneliness of being back in a body that had often felt like a cage. I had no answers for why things had been the way they were in my life. The struggles, the confusion, the years of hiding in the shadows. Was it worth facing all that again? I turned to Jesus, my heart heavy with the weight of it all. But what if I'm not ready? What if I can't go back? What if it's too much? And in that moment, his gaze softened, filled with infinite compassion. You are never alone, Harry. I've always been with you, even in the darkest of times. And I will be with you now. The decision was clear now. I didn't need to ask for more answers. I didn't need everything figured out. The love I felt here was something I could carry with me, something that would guide me as I returned to the world. I wasn't going back empty-handed. I was going back with a new understanding of who I was, of what I was capable of. There was a moment, just one fleeting moment, when I felt myself being drawn back into my body. The pull was gentle, but undeniable. It wasn't painful, but it felt like I was being tugged in two different directions. This peaceful, radiant light and the heavy weight of the physical world. But I knew now, this wasn't my time. My journey hadn't ended. It had just begun. As I moved toward that pull, the light around me started to fade, not with any sense of loss, but with the promise that it would always be there. The love I felt, the peace, the understanding, those weren't just things I had experienced for a fleeting moment. They were things I could carry with me. They were things I could share with the world. I took one last look at the beautiful light, knowing that this was not an end, but a beginning. And then in the blink of an eye, I was back. It wasn't a jarring transition. It wasn't like falling from a great height. But as I returned to my physical form, I could feel my heart beat once again. The coolness of the hospital room filled my senses, bright, sterile, and unforgiving after the warmth I had just left behind. But there was no panic, no fear. The peace that had filled me in the afterlife, in that light, still lingered in the depths of my soul. And in that moment, I understood I was here for a reason. I wasn't just going back to the same life I had before. I was going back to live it differently, to embrace who I truly was, to embrace the love that had always been within me, but that I had hidden out of fear. As the doctors rushed in, monitoring my vitals, I felt the overwhelming weight of the reality around me. My physical body, the beeping machines, the sterile white walls. But I also felt something else. It was like a thread pulling me forward, a deeper purpose that had been revealed in those 9 minutes of nothingness. A purpose that I couldn't fully grasp just yet, but I knew I would. And I knew, without a doubt, that I had been given a second chance. A second chance to not just live, but to be myself. To finally come out and stop hiding. To be unapologetically me. I didn't know exactly how I was going to do it, but I knew one thing. I was never going to be the same. The first few days after I returned were a blur. I was still in the hospital when I regained consciousness, and the world around me was nothing like the serene, peaceful place I had left. The machines beeped incessantly. Nurses bustled about. People were rushing in and out, all too busy with their lives to notice what had just happened to me. But as they worked, as they tried to bring me back to the ordinary world, something inside me was still somewhere else. The peace, the love, the clarity I had felt, it hadn't vanished. It hadn't disappeared with my return to this physical body. It stayed with me, buried deep within me like a wellspring of calm. I remember looking at the doctors and nurses as they fussed over me, and it felt like I was seeing them for the first time, not just as healthcare professionals, but as fellow human beings. Their struggles, their worries, their desires. I could feel them. I had never experienced that before. It was as if the veil between me and the world had been lifted, and I could see the raw humanity in everyone. It wasn't something I could explain. It was a deep, knowing sensation that connected me to everyone I encountered, even in the hospital room. At first, I couldn't explain what had happened to me, let alone talk about it with anyone. How could I? How could I describe something so intimate, so overwhelmingly powerful to people who hadn't experienced it? How could I put words to the vast, infinite love I had felt? The truth was I didn't know how to explain it, but that didn't mean I didn't want to. I was discharged from the hospital a few days later, and as I returned home, something became painfully clear. I wasn't the same person I had been before my NDE. Not even close. The world outside seemed more vivid, more intense, and yet strangely quieter at the same time. The bustling noise of everyday life felt muffled, as though I was standing on the edge of it, observing from a distance. The truth I had learned in the afterlife had changed everything for me, and I couldn't shake it. The constant anxiety I had about being gay, about being rejected, misunderstood, or unloved felt so insignificant. There was a peace that had settled into my soul, a calm certainty that who I was, just as I am, was enough. But living that truth in the world, that was going to be harder than I had ever imagined. I remember sitting in my apartment the night I got home, staring at the walls, and feeling an overwhelming desire to do something, to take action, to live out this new purpose that was so clear to me now. But what was that purpose? I had spent my life hiding, running, avoiding. Now that I knew who I truly was, the idea of living in the open terrified me more than ever. But something inside me refused to let me go back to my old ways. The truth I had been given wasn't meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared, even if that meant stepping into the unknown, even if that meant facing the fear of rejection, or the fear of the judgment that had haunted me for years. The days after my return were filled with a strange mixture of peace and fear. I felt this deep knowing, this understanding that I was capable of so much more than I had ever imagined, but it was buried under layers of anxiety. How could I just go out into the world and be the person I now knew I was meant to be? How could I be honest about myself after so many years of pretending? I began to think about all the moments I had spent hiding parts of myself from those I loved. I thought about the relationships I had forced myself into because I didn't want to face the truth. I thought about the shame I had felt, shame that had held me captive for so long. But then a voice echoed in my mind, the same voice that had spoken to me in the afterlife, the voice that had filled me with love and understanding. You are not defined by your fears. You are defined by your courage. Those words stayed with me, guiding me through the darkest parts of my mind. The more I thought about it, the more I realized my NDE had given me something that nothing else in life had: clarity. I wasn't just alive because my heart had started beating again. I was alive because I had been given a second chance, a chance to live authentically, a chance to finally come out, to live openly, without shame. I had known this moment was coming. I had known I would eventually have to face the people I loved and tell them the truth about myself. I knew it was never going to be easy. But after everything I had experienced, after meeting Jesus, after feeling that overwhelming love and acceptance, I knew I had to face the truth, not just for myself, but for them too. One evening, I invited my parents over for dinner. The tension in the room was thick as we sat down at the table. I had never been able to speak openly with them about who I truly was. We had danced around the topic for years, but now I had no choice. As I sat across from them, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I thought back to the hospital room, to the light, to Jesus' gentle, knowing gaze. I felt his presence in that moment, his love surrounding me, reminding me that this was the moment. I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad," I started, my voice shaking just a little. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been holding inside for a long time." They both stopped eating, their eyes locking onto mine. I could feel their uncertainty, their worry, but I didn't back down. I wasn't going to run anymore. "I'm gay," I said, the words finally leaving my mouth. "And I'm not sorry for who I am. I never should have been." The reaction. There was silence. The kind of silence that hung in the air, thick and heavy, as if everything had stopped in that moment. My heart raced. What would they say? Would they reject me? Would they be disappointed? Finally, my mother spoke. Her voice was quiet, but steady. "Honey, we've always loved you. We always will." She reached across the table and took my hand. "I just want you to be happy. That's all that matters to me." And then my dad, who had always seemed so distant and guarded, spoke up. "We don't always understand everything, Harry, but we're here for you. We always have been." I couldn't believe it. In that moment, I felt everything I had been holding inside me for years. The fear, the shame, the anxiety start to lift. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was carrying a secret. I didn't feel like I had to hide anything anymore. It wasn't easy, of course. The road ahead wasn't free of challenges. There were still people in my life who couldn't accept me for who I was. There were still moments of doubt, moments of fear. But in my heart, I knew something that could never be taken away. I had been given a purpose, a life to live with love, with authenticity, with courage. And every day, as I walked forward in my truth, I felt the presence of that light with me. Not in the same way it had been in the afterlife, but in every act of kindness, every moment of connection. It was like that warmth, that unconditional love, was always within me, guiding me to live fully and fearlessly.